Hello everyone. This evening I would like to talk about a very famous writer who's, I'd say, almost universally known within the English language and reasonably well known with outside as well, and that is of course Charles Dickens. Now, many people may be aware that this year, 2012, actually marks the bicentenary of Dickens' birth. He was born in 1812 in Portsmouth, Hampshire, which is a southern county of England, and during his lifetime he wasn't just a great writer, he was also a social commentator and a major celebrity of his day. I think he once said something along the lines of fame has exhausted me, so he was a very, very famous man in his day, certainly as famous as J.K. Rowling would be today. But Charles Dickens is one of my favourite writers. Some of his writing I find a little long-winded, but nevertheless the themes, the subjects, I find very interesting. A lot of Victorian era writers, for example, if we look at the Bronte sisters, a lot of their novels, it's certainly great literature, but they tend to be set mostly within the upper class, or at least middle class to upper class settings, stately homes, that sort of things, and a lot of it focuses on courtship, and that's fine if you're into that particular genre. But I think Dickens is he covers a much broader section of society, everything from upper class to not just working class, but the absolute pits of society. There's some things I'd like to show you. First of all, not sure if you could see that. That's a coin from the Royal Mint, which is a special organisation in the UK that reproduces commemorative coins, or produces commemorative coins I should say. So this is specifically for the Dickens Bicentenary. I'll just show you again. And you may be able to notice this coin is actually, it's done in the formation of Dickens' head, that famous beard, and it's hard to see in this, but basically the writing on the coin, this is a £2 value coin, is the writing on his head is made up of famous works of Charles Dickens. Just show you the inside of that there. That's a famous painting called Dickens' Dream by a man called, I think it was William Bust. Apologies if I misquote that. It was a very famous painting. It shows Dickens basically sleeping and all his famous creative ideas coming out there. So yeah, I've been interested in Charles Dickens for a long time. The Victorian period of British history is a particularly interesting period for me. One notable thing is, whilst we were the world superpower of that time, the British Empire literally covered the world. It was the empire on which the sun never set. I'll make another video about that. But one of the great ironies that Dickens covered in his writing was social commentary. The great paradox that we had this vast power as an empire, and yet there was some abysmal poverty within Britain. You could go into the slums of that time and they would be unimaginable to the London we see today. We have poverty today, but nothing, I think, comparable to the poverty of that time. And Dickens deserves credit for confronting this head on. And I always think if Charles Dickens had been a politician, he would have been a very good politician. He would have been a great reformer. I'm not quite sure what his political views were. Certainly he was a reformer, but I'm not quite sure if he was particularly interested in party politics. But I always feel had he got into Parliament, he could have made a lot of difference. He could have been up there with the Lord Shaftesbury's, William Gladstone's perhaps. But Dickens, as a writer, deserves a lot of credit for bringing those issues to the forefront, which a lot of other writers, contemporary writers, didn't do. Dickens certainly brought those issues to the forefront, issues like poverty, child exploitation, workhouses, prostitution, you name it, they were all there. And I think the enduring legacy of Dickens is the fact that 200 years after he was born, we still see his works produced on screen. The BBC has done some particularly good productions over the years. One of my favourites of Dickens novels is Oliver Twist. It's also one of the most famous, I think. And the reason for that is it's because it's one I'm most familiar with. I've seen several productions of it on stage. I've seen many productions on screen. My personal preference, I think the Roman Polanski version is very good. The 1969 musical, 68 musical I should say, obviously there's some artistic license there, but I think the Oliver Reed, Bill Sikes was superb at that role. I always remember that version going back a long, long way. And A Christmas Carol, which wasn't actually a novel, I believe it was a serial production, but I've always been interested in A Christmas Carol. Within my family we have a bit of a tradition of watching that every Christmas, different versions. We always like the George C. Scott version. George C. Scott's obviously an American actor, but he done a very good job of playing this old 19th century British miser, Ebenezer Scrooge. And there's been many productions of that as well, of course. I think the Jim Carrey version, I was quite sceptical when I heard Jim Carrey was doing it, some kind of comedian really pull this off, but I must admit I was pleasantly surprised. I thought it was great. The animation was great. I really enjoyed that. It was much better than I'd anticipated. So I was a bit wary of the CGI effect, if that could really be used in something like A Christmas Carol, but it really worked for me. It's one of my two favourite versions, but I've seen several. Great Expectations, I saw a recent BBC version of that, a bit of it. I quite enjoyed that. I believe the most successful of all of his books was A Tale of Two Cities, which was set during the Napoleonic Wars between London and Paris. I haven't read that in full, but actually I've got three famous books here. Now these books are much newer than they look, although they're leather bound. So there we have A Tale of Two Cities. Well, that's the writing's the wrong way around, but A Tale of Two Cities, Great Expectations, and of course Oliver Twist. But of course he wrote many books. Little Dorrit, I'm going to watch the BBC production of that. What else do we have? Pickwick Papers. I'm quite interested in some of his early works because he, as well as a writer, Charles Dickens was also a journalist, and he wrote under the editorial name, I believe, of Dear Boz. So I'd like to look a bit more at those works. As a ambitious writer myself, I'm working on my first novel at the moment. A very competitive industry. If I get a tenth of the success that Charles Dickens had, enduring success, I'd be a happy man. I am inspired by Dickens. I think he was a very interesting man. Not a poor man. Certainly his writing made him quite well off by the end of his life, but he was a workaholic. Now that's an interesting factor. And one reason for that was he'd seen his father put in a debtor's prison in the Marshalsea, which is now an abandoned prison in London, and he saw what effects that had being in debt at that time. So that sort of put this subconscious thing in his mind about being a workaholic. He died in his 50s, which by today's standards sounds quite young, but by Victorian standards that was probably about average. Anyway, very interesting man. Basically with this video I'd like to ask, what is everyone's favourite Dickens production? Do you have a favourite? Do you know much about Charles Dickens? If you're not too familiar with him, I'll be happy to talk about that in the comments section. There's been a number of commemorations around the UK this year for his Bicentenary, 200 years since he was born. I'd just like to show you something quickly. I bought this book a while back. It's simply called Dickens London. Now this book is not so much about Dickens' famous novels, but actually about the contemporary London that he lived in. And the writer says it more resembles a Jakarta slum today than the London we know of 2012. So that's interesting. Voices from Dickens London. It's about the experience people had at that time: poverty, wealth, sports, punishment. I mean, Dickens was actually witness to several public hangings, which sickened him. It was a very different world than what we have today. The London in which Dickens was growing up was the London of about the 1840s to the 1870s. He died in 1870. His lifespan was 1812 to 1870, and the time he lived in London was 1822 to 1870. So he spent most of his life in London. So whilst he's associated with Portsmouth and with Kent, London, I think, will always be associated with Charles Dickens. So that's it. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you think of particular productions, if you can recommend any. Maybe if you want to be a little bit more critical about Dickens' writing. I know he's not quite to everyone's taste, but he is one of the most successful writers of all time. Not just in the English language, but I think all around. He's certainly in the top 20. Yeah, so that's it. 200 years. This is the Dickens Bicentenary, so I thought it would be appropriate to make a video of him. Just in case there's a background smog here. Smog. I've got an incense stick, and I do like to burn incense occasionally, as you can see. I'm not a smoker, but I find incense very relaxing. So maybe you can see that. Anyway, Charles Dickens, 1812 to 1870. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you.